Hi everyone, this is Ria from Castle Island. This week, I had a conversation with Richard Meissner, CTO of Safe, formerly known as Gnosis Safe, which is used to secure an enormous amount of ETH, USDC, and other assets for organizations and individuals. In this episode, Richard shares how Safe has evolved and continues to evolve beyond being used as a multisig to creating tools and a broader ecosystem that makes it easy for developers to realize the full power of account abstraction and smart contract wallets, as well as contribute to the network that they're building. We also revisit the meaning of account abstraction, progress since ERC 4337, which is a standard for account abstraction on Ethereum, and challenges that still impede widespread adoption of smart contract wallets. So, with that, here's my conversation with Richard. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to On the Brink with Castle Island. This is Ria, and today I'm joined by Richard, who is the CTO of Safe, formerly known as Gnosis Safe. Richard, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm very excited to have a conversation with you about account abstraction and the role that Safe is playing in that whole conversation and evolution of the crypto space.
Happy to be here and happy to share or have some discussions around this, exchanging some knowledge and some thoughts.
Well, maybe just to start, it would be great to get a quick background on yourself. What spurred you to join the crypto space? What were you doing prior to crypto? How long have you been at Gnosis slash Safe? And yeah, how has it evolved? How has it evolved since you joined?
That's a long story. It's going to be a long story, but I try to make it short. So actually, before I joined Gnosis, I was not in the crypto space, so it was Gnosis actually, and primarily even Stefan George, who is the CTO of Gnosis, basically that got me to join the crypto space. Before I was a mobile developer, and I was working in a smaller startup, working on something similar like TikTok, just a couple of years earlier. So completely different space. But yeah, then I think Stefan got me on board with Gnosis. I very fast fell in love with this open ecosystem that Ethereum is, where you can look into all the different parts, where it's a very active community. And yeah, that was in 2017. So it was right after the token launch or the ICO from Gnosis. And at this point, actually, why Stefan got me on board is because we wanted to have a mobile version of the Gnosis multisig at this point. Like, it was not the Safe at this point, it was a Gnosis multisig. And so yeah, that's how we started. And then I started writing the first version of the Safe contract. So got immediately in 2017 started with smart contracts, evolving in the tech. And yes, also in 2017 we launched a first alpha version of the Safe on the contract level with a simple mobile app. And yeah, since then I'm responsible for most of the technical stuff around the Safe. It has been evolving from a team that was Android only 2 people towards being more full mobile, and then into being a web app. And now we are a team from more than 60 people working on this project, and where it's really the focus shifting from being an end user product to building an ecosystem around account abstraction and account abstraction tooling and smart contract accounts.
Double clicking on account abstraction, smart contract wallets, it'd be helpful to kind of understand how Safe has evolved as the discussion around smart contract wallets and account abstraction has progressed. I think initially, historically, I have kind of used Safe as a tool that is used in decentralized organizations for managing pools of capital with a group of people. I think that narrative around Safe and what it can do is shifting from being just obviously a multi-sig for small groups of people and decentralized organizations to a tool that individuals can also really benefit from and leverage. And I think that kind of narrative has shifted as account abstraction, smart contract wallets have become more prevalent. So, actually, maybe let's do a two-part discussion because I also want to just quickly level set and maybe help listeners understand what we are talking about when we say account abstraction and smart contract wallet. Um, and then maybe we can move on to the discussion about how Safe has evolved.
Cool. So yeah, how would I summarize account abstraction and also smart contract wallets? I think for us, like for the longest time, when we look at blockchain, right, like it's this all or nothing approach when it comes to the asset management. And so you have your private key, and you have to like pay attention that you don't leak it, and it's very hard to give others partial access to this point. And this is where actually on the Ethereum-based networks, or Ethereum was the first one. There are a lot of other blockchains by now that have this smart contract functionality where we can put this logic onto chain and actually using then a contract to manage your assets, your like your identity or becoming your identity. And then this, it's not this one on like all or nothing approach. And actually with smart contracts, since they can interact also with other smart contracts, you can build a system where you can extend this very much. The challenge here is still that most of the blockchains, also in Ethereum, it's still expected that this initial interaction always comes from a private key. So if you have a smart contract account like a Safe, you still need a private key to trigger your identity through this to the smart contract account. And this is where account abstraction comes into play, where it basically says, hey, we should stop thinking about private keys, and also the blockchain should stop thinking about private keys. It should be there's a smart contract account, and when it comes to paying fees or signing transaction, like we abstract this into this account. We just define some interfaces, and yeah, this abstraction, so abstracting the account, that's account abstraction. And yeah, this is where also for us, we have been, like with the Safe, building the smart contract wallet was the longest, and there we had different ways to try to mitigate this challenge of that somebody needs a private key that has Ether on it so that they can interact with the smart contract account. But yeah, also in the recent times, there had been, or like in the recent half a year, like there has been a lot of movement around this, like how could this become more of a standard and not just separate teams like Argent or Safe trying to work around this issue.
Got it. Would you say that maybe multi-sig is one specific use case or benefit of account abstraction, and maybe account abstraction makes it easier? And then maybe talk a little bit about some of the other benefits that are afforded to the space as a result of smart contract wallets becoming more standardized via account abstraction.
Yes, I would not say that multi-sigs are only possible with account abstraction. It's more like, I mean, you can have a smart contract account that is a multi-sig, as we have seen with the Safe, without account abstraction. But when we look at the UX level, as mentioned, right, like normally as a user, and this is also why we started developing this actually, is right, like you are used to from most of the Web2 worlds that you have this two-factor authentication, right? And that this can be any simple setup, like these two keys can be your browser and your phone, but it's not that you both need like this super, like you are very flexible here. On Ethereum, the problem is if you build a multi-sig, you still, like while you can have most of your funds all in your multi-sig account, like a little bit of your funds need to be somewhere else so that you can still interact with this. And this is a UX that is super annoying for a lot of users, and where it's like building around of this is where account abstraction really improves the UX a lot, right? Like because then suddenly having account abstraction, aligning as a system on how do we handle these abstracted account and smart contract accounts allows the tooling around this to really grow. And this is where for us at Safe, like 4337, a very big benefit was that suddenly they communicated, and you had like more discussions around this. How can we align on interacting with smart contract accounts, and a lot of visibility was there. So this is where I would say, again, account abstraction not necessary for all of these use cases, but they will make it a lot. like I would say, will benefit the ecosystem, make the ecosystem grow, and therefore bring us more diversity towards the user, so that the UX is better. When it comes to the use cases in general that we can, or where we believe in why smart contract accounts are required, is that, I mean, I teased it before a little bit with this not having this all or nothing approach, right? Like, and this is beyond this, you want to have two-factor authentication for security. It's actually that for certain actions, you might not want to, like, you don't require 2FA. Let's assume one of the examples was that you want to have this flexibility to switch between stable coins. Naturally, the risk is very low when swapping between stable coins, because most of the times they should be very similar value, but there are reasons where this would be very helpful. And here, this is where you could say this can happen automatically, right? Like, you want that there is some extra key, or where you don't need your full-fledged security setup, where you can have this happen automatically, very much optimizing on your experience when you trade. This is a very specific DeFi example, or very specific actually also for this stablecoin arbitration, which is a very specific topic in DeFi. But like a more simple example is, right, like when we think about recovery, and recovery is this big topic. There was, like, when we look at how Ledger also recently had their announcement, right, which is still recurring, where people lose their private key and then lose everything. And with smart contract accounts, you have the possibility to think a little bit outside of the box of just losing everything, in the sense of, you can say, we see Argent, where they say we have guardians, so they themselves or a dedicated guardian is allowed to recover your safe, so switch out the owners that have been defined. You can have time blocks where you say if you don't deny the recovery within like a week, somebody else, like, you can recover access to it, so you don't even need anything. Or you can even use custodies where you interact with, I think Ledger, for example, uses what was the name?
Coin
Exactly.
cover.
Coin cover, where you could say coin cover can basically is like your guard, like your custody provider for your safe, and you can replace this without actually exposing any of the secrets. So having this recovery and being able to do this is quite powerful.
Yeah, before you go into some of the other benefits, I want to ask a question around recovery and maybe the role that traditional financial institutions can play in helping more mainstream users manage their keys and their wallets. Do you envision a future where you have traditional financial institutions, whether they're banks or fintechs, that hold a recovery key that they can use to help users in the case of, a forgotten password, a lost password, or a compromised account?
Yes. The short answer is yes. The longer answer is a little more detailed. I think Lucas also at some point mentions this as this hybrid custody mode, right? Like, where actually with smart contract accounts, and with also, like, still checking how we are interacting with these banks and other institutions, you have this way to provide a very flexible standard, right? Like, in the sense of, a user could say they start out with, let's take Safe as a very concrete example, with a safe that is created by a bank. And then they basically in the beginning just interact with the bank and just have their interface inside the bank. And at some point they say, but hey, I want to take more control, especially of my on-chain assets. And then you switch into this hybrid mode where the bank is only a recover part. So the hybrid custody then, so where they can potentially monitor certain, like, do security checks on your transactions that you trigger, and that they can recover your account. But you theoretically already are directly interacting with it, not through the bank interface. Even going towards the way that you completely opt out of the bank and you have your smart contract account, which you can then even take to other interfaces and UIs. I do believe that such a mode will be necessary if we aim for the next 1,000 people, because we cannot assume that everybody sets up a MetaMask and has this as an owner of a safe. I do believe there will always be such owners that use Ledger and MetaMask for this. It's just not the entry point, probably for the mass adoption. And yeah, this is also where, for the safe team, I think for us it's important, right? Like, we cannot cannot ignore the traditional finance sector in the existing world, right? Like even so, in some cases, this might be easier, especially since regulations are shifting quite a lot, and it's sometimes good and sometimes not so good for the crypto sector. But yeah, we believe that paying attention to it, trying to still like build bridges also towards the traditional finance space and traditional banks and engaging with them, and therefore building tooling where then the users can use this bank as an entry point towards blockchain is very much required.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt your flow around some of the other benefits. So recovery is one big one, obviously, and just adding a lot more flexibility around recovery and, helping shift from this paradigm where all the onus is on the user to manage their keys and protect them from loss or theft and so on. What are some of the other
I
benefits?
think another or for us, very cool feature that we would want to see is something around automation. I think a lot of users say we don't need this, but actually, if you think about the current Web2 world, a lot of things are automatically happening. You set up your subscription and you automatically pay every month your $10 for, I don't know, your favorite video streaming platform. And this is just a very obvious example, but there's a lot of things where you like do this. And just recently, I mean, one of the big topics is this intents, right? Like where you say, hey, I want to just define what I want to have at the end and what I've said at the beginning, but also this involves automation, right? Like where you automatically do certain transfers just to get the expected outcome of your intent. And having then smart contracts where you can extend them theoretically allows you to potentially interact with your smart contract on an intent basis rather than saying what you want to have as a raw transaction. And again, also intents going further into this direction of fun new buzzwords, right? Like as when we think about AI and ChatGPT and these all these models, it's also where you say if you take intents, combine them with the AI models, and then plug them into a smart contract account, you can have a lot of very powerful concepts that are then accessible for a lot of users. And then you have to balance this out with a lot of the security aspects, and also their smart contracts or accounts can bring this point where you say you can still perform checks on the transactions then being automatically generated for these intents. Plugging into the example of the banks again, right? Like where they potentially could double check that these transactions are not malicious. Actually, our web interface has such a security check that when you trigger a transaction, it tells you, is there a security risk or not, right? And so combining all of this is where really you get then the full power out of account abstraction, and you can start building also with smart contract accounts where you can start building tools that for the end user are very intuitive to use. Things are happening automatic. Still, you have a high level of security. Also, you can adjust the security based on what you're doing. Are you just doing a swap for 10 euros? Or are you trying to transfer all your assets? Should have different means on this. And yeah, this flexibility is really where we see a big benefit. And I mean, all of these examples that I brought were primarily targeted towards like individual users. But as you also mentioned yourself earlier, right, like actually the initial use case one of the initial use cases was really this multi-sig where actually teams started using this to manage their treasuries. And this is also how Gnosis started with their multi-sig and what they used it for. And this even transitioned into DAOs, right? Like, and also there we can see it that also they want to have hierarchies, that certain things can be done or by certain subgroups for certain interactions. And all of this is possible with smart contracts, where if you want to do this with private keys, you would have to have a very big shift. Where do you share these private keys? How do you separate your funds into all of these? So this power is really what we believe in makes a wide adoption of smart contract wallets necessary to really bring all the use cases that we use in the day-to-day life in Web 2 also to Web 3.
One thing that I want to double click on is this concept of intents. That's a topic that we haven't really broached on the podcast yet. So maybe just taking a step back, can you explain what we mean when we say intents? How is it different from how we've how users have been transacting and operating and expressing the desire to do something on chain uh, historically?
Yes, I will try to, because I think intents are at least currently not really used as a keyword for smart contract accounts, rather in the DeFi sector, right? And therefore, I would also bring an example from there. And so in the past, if you wanted to do a trade, right, like you specified the very concrete transaction, like for if you go to Uniswap, you say, hey, I want to trade this token and want to get at least this amount of other token and do this against this contract. And this is the exact route. So it's this token versus the other one. And with this deadline. And actually, this is quite complex because you need to know all these parameters. And actually, when we look, actually, a very early version also of the CowSwap team, which I think they started doing this quite early, where you say, actually, the only thing that you as a user care about, you give a token and you get a token. And actually, how the route is being done or what other exchanges are used under the hood, you don't care, right? Like, so your intent is, I want to sell. Yeah, I mean, CowSwap, I'm not sure if you're aware, it was also part of the Gnosis team. So there was in the past a workshop where they were explaining the fun stuff under the hood, and they were using this example of you are on a market and you want to you have like apples and you want to have fish, and how do you do this, right? Like, and normally you would have to find somebody who says, hey, I take your apples and I give you my fish. But actually, especially in a bigger marketplace, this doesn't matter, right? Like, it might be that you first exchange your apple for peers and then go somebody else where you exchange the peers for the fish, right? Like, you have this ring trade mechanism. And until for a long time, people had to understand all of this, which is complex. And you just want to go to the marketplace and say, here, this is what I want to sell apples, or I want to give apples away, and I want to get fish. That's my intent. I don't care how you do this. I just want to go home with my fish and be happy. And this is basically the intent. And then we have intent engines that basically under the hood can handle this. And if we take this then to the wallets, right, like you would go in the same way that you could even, there was a very interesting prototype at the East Tokyo Hackathon where basically you could tell a ChatGTP connected that I want to have a yield on a DeFi platform from X for this token, and they're going to generate you this transaction that makes this happen. And this is basically, you just tell you the intent, and then in the background you pull the different pool information that build the different transactions. And also then with smart contract wallets, you propose them into the queue, and then they can be executed. Right? Like, so for the user, they don't have to think about the details.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that has the potential to be very powerful because, historically, the way that we've operated is you go to a specific application and you have to be very specific about what you want the transaction to do, right? But as the universe of applications and use cases grows, that just allows you to be more flexible as a user and not have to think as much about where to go, and maybe even have guardrails as things evolve where you can say, across these vetted contracts, these whitelisted contracts or vetted applications, find me the best yield or get me the best price on this trade or get me the lowest price NFT in this collection across all of these different marketplaces. So yeah, I think that's really powerful. I was listening to a talk that Uma Roy from Succinct gave at DBA's Research Day, and she was talking a little bit about how you can leverage account abstraction and intents maybe in tandem to, especially also as the crypto space becomes more cross-chain and you have some level of fragmentation, or you have a significant fragmentation of applications that exist on L1 or across different L2s. What role do you think account abstraction could play in kind of leveling the playing field and simplifying some of this fragmentation and complexity as we move towards a more cross-chain world? And maybe what are some of the challenges in account abstraction even playing a role and helping?
Yes, let's try to start from this. And I also actually there is a project which I know that tries to also work on this or support this on an intent-like basis. So I think the challenges with account abstraction is and when it comes to cross-chain and multi-chain, right? Like it's a little bit that smart contracts accounts very much depend on the implementation and the current state of one chain, right? Like, so your smart contract account is it's like a small program with the internal state on a specific chain. And and this model is very hard for users to grasp because current blockchain users are used to this model. I have my private key that generates a public key which defines my address, and this address is the same across all of the Ethereum networks because they use the same cryptographic curves, all the same logic there. And this becomes very hard with smart contract accounts because there's a lot more involved than just deriving a public key. And this is where then the first challenge starts, where we always thinking about, okay, how do we get the same address across all networks? Do we want to have the same address on all networks? We are like, if you look at, for example, Starknet or also ZK Sync, they are not like Starknet is not an EVM network, and ZK Sync is also not like a network where the bytecode is not the same, so you cannot get the same addresses. It's impossible. So yeah, this is a challenge where it's very hard for us, how to think about this, that it's not possible to have the same address. And even if you have the same address, there is something we call state drift, right? Like it's a smart contract account where you have an owner defined, but if you recover your account on mainnet to a new owner, it doesn't mean that it's recovered on Polygon or Avalanche or Gnosis Chain or anything. They're still the old owner, so you suddenly have two wallets that are owned by different people, which with the same address. And in these challenges, like to overcome them, that's a question, okay, how do these contracts behave across chain? And they're one of the proposals actually that we have been also discussing with Vitalik and also with Martin from Gnosis was this where you say you have this beacon account or main account. I think Vitalik called it in his blog post a key store, where you say this exists on one chain and all the other chains just through zero knowledge proofs and bridges can access the state, and therefore as long as you update your key store you can access in all states. And I think this is a very interesting idea. It's something that we also have to look into how to do this, because zero knowledge proofs, again, such a buzzword that everybody can solve all our problems. Let's see if this is really true, but yeah. And abstracting this again away, how do you make this accessible to the user, right? Like how do you explain it to the user? This will become hard. And there I think especially this whole intent-based and also using then an additional layer that can process these intents into transaction on multiple chains potentially. I think this will be something that we have to look into. It should be part of our tooling building on top of this. There was, I think, the Anoma team, which is already doing something like this. And there, I think, intents will provide a form of abstraction towards the user. So we will have different levels of abstraction, where account abstraction is actually on a very low level, technical level, and it's probably more interesting for the developers than it's actually to the end user. And then we have to use something like intents, and even basically on top of intents, potentially something like AI, which basically generates meaningful intents to bring a user experience where we say, hey, this is basically day-to-day usage already.
On the topic of challenges, maybe just taking a step back, since ERC 4337 was rolled out, that has made it significantly easier to create and leverage smart contract wallets. What are still some of the challenges that you're facing as you're, building safes, tooling around account abstraction and smart contract wallets that even today kind of make it challenging to further adoption of smart contract wallets?
Yes. I think for this, it's important to understand what really got out of 4337 is really this fee payment, right? Like, so 4337 generated a standard for how do we pay for fees? Like, how do we handle this problem that I mentioned earlier, that you need an account that still pays for the transaction? And there, 4337 generated a standard where you can plug into and solve, like you as a developer don't have to worry about this problem. In the past, this is also very commonly referred to as relayers, and there are quite some other projects where 4337 aims for to be the most decentralized version and being a stepping stone to have this as part of the protocol. That being said, as it is this really much this on-chain component of account abstraction. How do you pay a fee? Therefore, for the one thing that it for us doesn't solve is what happens off-chain. And when we think about dApps, actually a lot of dApps have this notion where you sign messages, right? Like you want to sign a specific action, and then this is validated off-chain for that you can interact with the protocol. OpenSea, for example, uses this for login and also that you can authorize certain trades. CowSwap does the same, and 1inch2 for the fusion, right? Like they use these signatures. But most of these tools still think these signatures are primarily generated by private public key pairs. And it's nice that we on-chain have this account abstraction for fee payment. It doesn't have all of this moves towards the signature-based dApps, which is necessary as much of the value and the gas fees increased. We want to have more stuff happening off-chain. But this one doesn't consider the smart contract accounts. So this really moving this off-chain is very important. Like this, or thinking about the off-chain component of smart contract accounts is very important for us. And actually, the examples that I mentioned, especially CowSwap and also 1inch, they actually do consider smart contract wallets. There's EP.440, which has been around for quite some time, which exactly tackles this problem. And beyond this, we also see that even with 4337, that when you go into smart contract wallets, for the people that try to understand what actually happens with your smart contract wallet, that's not easy. Like if you use a smart contract wallet, it's not as simple as going to Etherscan and you see what happens. Because suddenly this transaction is not initiated by your account because it's some internal transaction, how it's being called. So you need to have some more technical knowledge. This also means that some tooling, how you retrieve the state, how you try to monitor changes, which have been around for a while and also are present in libraries like Ethers or Web3.js, don't work one-to-one the same way. And this is basically a developer education that also needs to happen, and where also we need to generate the relevant tools, right? Like how can you keep track of state changes? How can you get a list of transactions, which before it was super trivial. You can go to Etherscan and ask, give me all the transactions for a specific account. It doesn't work this way with smart contract accounts. So yes, to summarize, it's a little bit this off-chain signature part, but also this tooling part that for us are still big challenges to really say, okay, now we are ready that everybody can participate in this.
Maybe just taking a step back and it'd be great to talk a little bit more specifically about Safe and the role that Safe is playing in furthering the adoption of smart contract wallets and account abstraction. Could you talk a little bit about that and maybe just revisit the conversation that we started having around, Safe pre 4337 and Safe post 4337, or maybe that's not even like the right way to think about it, but as account abstraction has become more standardized, how has what exactly is Safe doing in the space?
Yes. So what is Safe doing in the space? Right, like for us, as mentioned before, we try to shift away from this point where we say we only want to be an end user product where we focus on ourselves, and we rather want to provide like this middleware or this base framework where you can build on top of for all of the to leverage all of the account abstraction. And I think we are also participating in quite a lot of the initiatives when it comes to these modular accounts, where we say these are required for for all the solutions around recovery and what we talked about before. Right? And this is where, for us, one of the big parts is that we generate an ecosystem that can participate also in the governance around this. This is what we set up as a Safe DAO, but this is more targeted towards a Safe ecosystem. And generally, we want to provide something that can be used by all of the ecosystem, by dApp developers, that make it easier to integrate with this. And this is where currently a big focus for us is really creating educational material. I think there's a lot of teams out there currently focusing on this. We try to stipulate new projects building on top of account abstraction. We try to utilize our connections also to dApps to make sure that they become more smart contract friendly to leverage the problem that we had before. And one of our biggest focus is still this topic around security, right? Like, so where we are working together with companies like Chitoro also to work on formal verification again of our core contracts, but also think about how can formal verification play a role for the general modularized smart contract account framework, but also creating standards where we can engage with auditors that should audit most of these components to provide security to the user. Right? Like, so the security aspect is very important for us. It's one of our highest values and has been for a long time. We feel like we need to generate a system that brings this security also, like, so that users can leverage the security, right? Like, only then you can really take advantage of the full power of smart contract accounts, where for the most part it's, when we talk about smart contract accounts, it's always this smart contract risk that people also mention with it, right? So yeah, this is where for us it's really like, okay, empowering the ecosystem to focus more on the solving the use cases, not always having to rebuild the core, right? Like, and this is where we really want to step up the game a little bit.
On this topic of building an ecosystem, one, I guess, concept that I've seen mentioned by Safe is this concept of Safe modules. Could you talk a little bit more about that? What modules have you maybe developed yourselves internally, and then how are you thinking about maybe making it possible for other developers to come in and build modules that people apps can use as they kind of leverage your SDK?
Yes, so modules have been around since the first version of smart contracts, and theoretically, like, or the idea behind modules is that you can extend the functionality of your smart contract accounts. How is access to your account checked, right? Like, so one of the examples or one of the modules that we built and actually use also in our interface is this allowance module, where you basically can say up to a specific limit, some keys that you specify, some address actually, can execute a transaction. So this allows use cases where you say, hey, for large transfers, you still need your full security setup, but you could theoretically whitelist your account on your mobile phone, that you can do smaller transfers on the go. There are a couple of teams that do very more sophisticated setups, especially when it comes to DeFi, to have automatic trading, also similar to the use case that I mentioned with the stablecoins, but just way more complex, because they say, hey, you can define strategies under which we should do automatic trades, and then we execute these trades in the name of your wallet. There was also the Gelato team that had basically their whole task and automation engine was also available as a module, so that you can say under certain conditions execute a certain other transaction or do it recurring, and then it would also be executed via the safe. And last example, which is that I wanted to give, is this when it comes to DAOs, right? Like, we actually have this module where you can give the control over your account, over the safe account, to that it's voted on via snapshot, and then you connect your snapshot space where you have the DAO voting towards your account. So this flexibility to enable all these use cases, this is where we see the modules. And modules were always open for anybody to use, but it was this challenge that since they are so powerful, there comes a lot of risk with it, right? Like, if you want to, if you write a module and the module is malicious, it can basically do everything with your funds in your account, whatever they want. So the challenge that we're working on, and this is where where a lot of our focus is currently on, is like, how can we provide the security so to keep it modularized, where everybody can participate in this and can contribute to this, but we have some checks and balances so that we can really say, okay, this module is not malicious and
Authorized.
yes. And
Yeah.
it's coming back to this, where utilizing our networks, we have been talking to different auditors, we have talking to Chitara, what are like setups we can do. We also talking with heads finance around bug bounties, how you can integrate these, right? Like, so a lot of the security aspects will coordinate around this, and yeah, it's one of the things where we will be, which is currently one of our biggest focus points to work on.
I want to talk a little bit about adoption since adoption of smart contract wallets since ERC 4337 has been rolled out, and you have this standardization that you didn't have before. What has the uptake been like? What are maybe some specific examples? I think before we started recording, we were talking about Worldcoin and the discovery that a number of safes are being deployed on Optimism. People didn't know what it was until Worldcoin kind of came out and said, "Hey, we're the ones that are launching all of these safes on Optimism." I think also as far back as last November, they were starting to deploy safes on Polygon as well. So that's one very clear and I think major indication that smart contract wallets are starting to be widely adopted. Would be great to hear your general thoughts about adoption.
Yes. Let's start with Worldcoin. I think Worldcoin is a very nice use case, and as you said, it drives a lot of this migration. Just showed how many safes are related to Worldcoin, and it's actually also showcase how you can really use smart contracts to have this alternative authentication method where it's not your private key to connect to your account. When it comes to adoption, we really have to see. I think I would be and I would look at it a little differently when it comes to the Worldcoin case because it is one protocol, right? Like we would want that it's multiple protocols, and we have to also see how they approach their adoption. Is that when we look actually how many of these Worldcoin safes are actively used on a day-to-day basis, it's not on the level where we would say, okay, this is a breakthrough. It's still a very important and very good first steps that we see. Theoretically, a lot of people now have a smart contract account associated to them. The general adoption, I think one of the things that we recently looked at is really this the ratio of how many funds are locked versus how many users are using a smart contract account, and you can actually see that a very high amount of funds are locked in safes or general smart contract accounts, but specifically safes actually. While if you look how I think of the total value, it's actually comes to more than 1% of the total crypto value is locked in safes. So this is a large amount. But if you look at how many of the active accounts are safes, that's way below a percent, even way below 0.01% or something like this. So we see this imbalance where it's they are still seen as this tool to maximize on security, not on maximizing on UX. And I don't think this has been solved by 4337, to be honest. 4337 brought a lot of visibility here, and I think this is really what I personally maximize on for 4337, which I really value. That there has been a lot of visibility, a lot of community activity around it. But if we look at the adoption, it has not fundamentally changed yet how the adoption of smart contract accounts is. So I like to say that 4337 gave us the opportunity to set a good starting point, but it is only a starting point. We are not, 4337 didn't solve adoption, 4337 didn't solve all the account abstraction problems. It gave us a good starting point where we can build on top of as a community and move forward and make the adoption happen, basically.
What does moving forward look like from here? How do you start to have a conversation about what needs to be done in order to help people transition from thinking about smart contract wallets as a tool to maximize security to a tool that has the potential to significantly improve UX, onboarding, and security for individuals in a different way?
That's a very good question. I think knowing this would make a lot of things easier in my day-to-day work life. So I think there are many parts involved in this, right? The first thing is that we really have to see that which steps are relevant and how can we also make them leverage account abstraction. And leveraging account abstraction goes to the level where you say the users should not have to think about that it is actually a smart contract account. And I think in the traditional DeFi case, not traditional, in the OG Ethereum DeFi space, this is not like there. You will not have the biggest impact on this regard, right? Like it's actually when you look at NFTs and when you see how certain stores around NFTs for different purposes came up. As I actually really enjoyed DevCon in Prague, so quite a while ago, where you had a lot of these events where using kickback and on-chain mechanisms to have like these tickets, right? Like, and it died down for a while, but now with more NFT adoption, I think this is coming back. And there you want to have account abstraction that but users should not think about the account. Like this is, we partnered, or like we have an integration with Web3 auth where you can basically use your social login to get a smart contract account, but you don't know that you have this account. And making this something that is a standard, right? Like people should not have to think about creating a MetaMask account. You should think about, I log in with my, like as a start, I log in with my Gmail account or with my Apple account. Yes, not perfect in a decentralized way, but it's a good starting point. And then we can generate adoption. Additional to this, we should take this opportunity of this whole multi-chain universe that is spinning up. Right? We have more and more L2 spinning up, Optimism, zk-Sync, Avalanche, they all want to build this super chain where they have a lot of roll-ups going to their chain and then rolling up to mainnet. And also there we need to leverage, like I think solving there, or like making sure that this is a good smart contract account experience will empower a lot of the users, because then it should allow you to benefit there directly from the UX benefits, but also the big advantage is it's a clean state, right? Like it's not with all the legacy or original ideas from Ethereum, which have evolved over time, which make it to some extent slow, because we cannot just plug in native account abstraction on Ethereum mainnet. There are too many things to consider. But actually these L3 chains kind of, right, like there we have this opportunity. So this is for me moving forward, that we take advantage of these new developments, trying to plug in account abstraction quite early there. Also the Safe team actually talking to quite a lot of the different teams there and trying to think about how can we best support this. It's actually also a challenge for 43C7. Like the idea would be, how can you get the entry point present on all of these chains, right? Like this is non-trivial. And yeah, this is, once we have all of this, then I think we are at a point where we can see adoption picking up very significantly. Not just on a funds locked case, but really on this, having this as a daily active usage case.
Right. In that world, you know, what does Safe's evolution in this space look like? And I guess, how are you thinking about the role that Safe plays in this evolution over the next few months, years, and so on?
I think for us, there are two parts that are very important. And like one part is this, what I mentioned with the security. So building an ecosystem where we have these modularized components being easy to combine and plug them into a standard is very important. This is what we thrived towards with the original version of the Safe. It's actually also quite an important topic from a couple of other teams that we're also interacting with. There's ERC 6900, which goes into this direction. We have also our own proposals in this direction. So maximizing on this is definitely something where we gonna focus on in the next couple of months. And the other part is really where we have to maximize on this cross-chain component. And this is where the Safe, this vision from Vitalik, where you have like a key store, and this key store could be, or should be, in our opinion, a Safe, then having all the other L3, L2, whatever accounts being linked to this Safe would be something that for us is something that we have been ideating on too. It's just how do we put this together is non-trivial, and also there are different trust assumptions because it still involves bridges. Zero knowledge is not the magic bullet. It's also something that empowers a lot of things, but also the setup and how you go with it is quite important. And yeah, for all of this, you have to build tooling so that developers actually can use it, right? Like, so this is really for us on a high level, two of the focus points that we're working on, which connects to different initiatives that we then try to push forward.
That's great. Uh, yeah, as a last question, where can people, follow along with what Safe is building? How can they get involved? How can they follow you and what you're specifically doing? Yeah, tell us a little bit about how they can stay connected.
So the easiest way is Twitter, actually, as always, or as often, not always. So there's it's safe on Twitter, where we will regularly push updates, where we keep you informed about the latest development, also when it comes to our blog posts and what is happening on our forum. If you want to really actively participate in all these discussions, we are open source. All of our code is open source. Go to our GitHub, participate in our forum. As said, most of the changes there will be also published on our Twitter again. Um, and if you have questions towards the developers, you can join us our Discord. These are more the interactive channels where we also, if you have questions to us, all of these channels we respond normally. If you just want to read up yourself, we have safe.global as our webpage, which also links to our docs, which are docs.safe.global, where you can read up how you can utilize our tech stack. If you want to follow me on Twitter, that's R.I. Meissner, R.I.M.E.I.S.S.N.E.R. Too complicated. But yeah, you can find me on Twitter for this one. Um, as for me personally, the focus is more really around the security aspect and the general adoption of account abstraction. Um, yes.
That's great. Thank you so much, Richard, for coming on and having a really honest discussion about where we stand today. I think there were a lot of topics that you brought up in this conversation that I definitely want to explore in future episodes, especially, this concept of intents and AI and account abstraction. And then also just, having a more honest conversation about the barriers to adoption and what we really need to get from where we are today to a universe where everyone has a smart contract account, and a lot of the barriers around having to think about what you're doing when you're participating on chain are just abstracted away to a greater extent.
Thank you very much to you too. It was a pleasure to be on the call.